Tommy Zerotny patient. So essentially, you're doing a karate chop right through the head and creating two human beings, two spheres of consciousness. Now, many experiments have been done on these people, and I asked myself a very simple question. Okay, you've created two people here. What about their personalities? Do they have different personalities? What about their aesthetic preferences? Does one like blondes and the other like brunettes, for example? One like chocolate and the other like vanilla? What happens? So we tried these experiments, and what we did was we had to first train the right hemisphere to communicate with us. In fact, the right hemisphere can read simple commands, simple words, simple sentences. And then you ask a question and say, point to a box, yes, no, I don't know. Because it can't talk. The right hemisphere cannot talk. But it can comprehend simple semantics, simple questions. Left hemisphere, of course, can talk. So you can present boxes, yes, no, I don't know. So we asked, for example, are you at Caltech? And the right hemisphere pointed to yes. Are you on the moon? It said no. Are you in California? It said yes. Are you asleep? It said no. Then I said, are you a woman? And the patient is male. And he pointed to yes. And then started chuckling and laughing. So at least the right hemisphere has a sense of humor. Okay, so now comes the big question. What if you ask, do you believe in God? So I said, do you believe in God? And the right hemisphere went straight to yes. Right? I asked the same question to the left hemisphere, yes, no, I don't know. It went to no. Right? So here's a human being whose right hemisphere is an atheist, and left hemisphere, on the other hand, believes in God. And this finding should have sent a tsunami through the theological community, but barely produced a ripple, because it raises all kinds of profound theological questions. If this person dies, what happens? Does one hemisphere go to heaven and the other go to hell? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, we're now seeing that the left hand can perform the problem and that the right hand cannot. Now the question becomes, what happens when you allow both hands together to try to solve the problem? And what we find out is that they fight over each other. One hand knows how to do it, and one hand does not, and so they more or less squabble. And the reason for this is that the hemispheres are disconnected. The right hemisphere controls the left hand, and the left hemisphere controls the right hand. And these are almost mutually independent systems. It was as if two people were fighting over performing this task.
And some clever psychologists have managed to interview, as it were, each hemisphere separately and give them a personality inventory to fill out and give them the same personality inventory to friends and relatives. And what transpires is that the left hemisphere has a remarkably high opinion of itself compared with what other people think, whereas the right hemisphere tends to be a little bit on the downside, but is much closer to reality. Now, there is a difference, obviously, I've alerted you to this, between the reliability of the left hemisphere and its denial of reality. There are three ways in which I would draw your attention to this. The first is that if somebody has a right hemisphere stroke, they may have a paralyzed left half of the body, at least often a paralyzed left arm, possibly the whole of the left side of the body. But it's very common, more common than not, for them to deny that there is any problem. This doesn't work the other way around. If you have a left hemisphere stroke, the sufferer immediately is aware that something is wrong and is appropriately distressed about it, but not the other way around. And you can ask somebody who has a right hemisphere stroke to move their left arm, and of course they can't, but they say, there. And you say, well, we didn't see anything move, did you? No, we didn't see anything move. And you bring the arm right round in front of them and say, move that. And they say, oh, that's my mother's arm, or it's your arm, doctor, or it's the patient next to me's arm. But never to accept that there is something wrong with the self.
McGilchrist.
Iain
McGilchrist.
Yeah, I haven't read it in ages.
Man.
I've read it like, we'll talk about it when we're recording.
Yeah, well, we kind of are now. I could not believe that I hadn't come across this guy, because like when I was writing my book and just doing all this stuff, research about brain hemispheres, I just didn't come across him once. It's incredible. Like, I'm an internet addict, right? Like, I'm always looking at books and watching various people on YouTube. I don't think I heard him referenced once. I don't think I saw his book advertised once. Incredible, because that book is like everything that I've been interested in. Everything. It contains everything. It's like the holy grail of brain hemisphere literature. It's crazy.
It's amazing.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's not only is it well written and it has like a proper narrative, it ties it all together, but it's every single scientific paper and references there that you need to look into it and know that it's real. It's not just some kind of new age left brain, right brain stuff. It's like, the guy's trained. He's a interesting guy actually. He started out as a literature academic. I think he was like a researcher at Oxford or Cambridge, one of those, and it was English literature, and he'd written a book called Against Criticism, it's out of print. I don't think you can find it. I would like it, but basically the idea was you can't, in that book he said somewhere that the idea was in the literature courses they're destroying literature because they're trying to pick it apart into little pieces and then try and analyze and decide what it means in pieces, but really as a whole, you need to understand it as a whole. As soon as you start taking it apart, you destroy it. Like the same with a movie, you have to watch the whole movie. You can't just take a bit and think you understand it. So it's the same point of view as he later has to do with the left brain and the right brain. So he started as a literature guy. Then he decided that you couldn't really understand life well enough without to do with like physiology and the body, basically. So he became trained as a doctor, like medical doctor, and then he became a psychiatrist, and then he was a practicing psychiatrist for years. And I think he was dividing his time writing this book, it was like 10 years or whatever, maybe it's 20 years, it's a long time, practicing psychiatrist for half of the week, and then living on a Scottish island near my neck of the woods, the other half writing. So interesting guy. The Scottish Islands is a good place for letting your right hemisphere run amok in a good way. I know this through experience. And then being a psychiatrist in London, probably that kind of atmosphere is going to be and having to do the amount of what he would later call left hemisphere types ways of knowing in order to pass exams and do that for a living. That's a good place to learn those things too. So you can kind of see in his life how he's left brain, right brain thing is the balance between them is working, which is interesting to me. So anyway, when you read his book, it's not like one of these dry neuroscience books with a stupid gimmick. It's like one big idea, and then they try and draw out 200 or 300 pages and make it in his boring stories and stuff. A guy who actually knows what he's talking about, but it also is, he appreciates poetry and metaphor and those things, which is a big part of what the book is actually about.
Yeah.
And when you read it, it will just blow your mind, both minds.
Yeah, again, it's one of those crazy things no one ever talks about, the asymmetry of the brains and the fact that they're kind of split like that. It just beggars belief, because it's fascinating. Like, it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
and
once you read the book, it's so compelling. You
totally.
Can't go back. It's like that's one of the books that really is your view of life before the book and then your view of life after the book.
Absolutely.
And it's funny that more people don't know about it.
Yeah, bizarre.
Yeah. Interested in. I think it's. I don't know.
Kevin, you're just cutting out a bit there. Maybe your connection's a little bit iffy. We lost a little bit there.
I was already interested in the left brain, right brain stuff and brain. So I was interested in the brain, how the brain worked, and then try to change how it works after reading and working with Christopher Hyatt stuff back in the day. And then the McGilchrist book came out in 2010, which I think Hyatt would have loved, would have recommended if it had been out then, because a lot of the same things he was talking about earlier relate to things that are mentioned in that book.
Very much, yeah.
And there are connections with some of the Eastern mystical stuff as well, obviously. And I stumbled across it. I don't remember. It was recommended along with some other thing that wasn't directly related, some other book. And then since then, I think it's mostly been adopted by people who already think about themselves as right brain people, and they kind of more wishy-washy, touchy-feely kind of people who don't really have a particularly strong reasoning ability.
Yeah.
But like a lot of those people jumped onto it because it justifies some of the stuff that they're right about, but also covers up some of the stuff that I think they have a blind spot about. Not that McGilchrist doesn't, but a lot of his followers do. So I think it got kind of pulled into that world for a while. Maybe it's taking more time for other medical or scientific people to catch up with it. I'm not sure. Seems to be philosophers catching up because it's actually an excellent introduction to. There's an excellent introduction to a few philosophers in it, in the context of left brain, right brain, that make the philosophers make sense in a way that never did for me before.
Particularly Nietzsche, right? He speaks about him a little bit, at least what I've read so far.
And Heidegger made no sense to me at all until I read this book. He also talks Heraclitus, and Hegel is in it a little bit, but the whole book kind of is Hegel-ish, although I'm not really a fan of Hegel. But I've not put the effort in to be a fan either. So I'm open to it, but it's not really my thing. But the style of the book and the ideas he has regarding left brain, right brain kind of go with that too, make a bit more sense of him. There's loads of other philosophers and stuff pulled in. There's loads of neuroscience, obviously, and the detailed science of that. But then there's a lot of philosophy in the middle third of the book, and then there's a lot of history and culture at the end of the last third of the book. So it's really like one of those books. I don't really want to try and, I don't want to try and summarize it, because you kind of destroy it if you summarize it. If you, especially this kind of book that is so big, it's like a big idea applied to everything.
Yeah, it's incredibly dense. It's a huge book anyway. I don't think you'd be able to summarize it easily, quickly. That's for sure. It's massive.
Exactly, and the type of people who are listening to this are the type of people who are already reading and thinking about things anyway, and they don't need a
analysis,
dumbed down summary to these things with the top 10 learnings. They just need to hear us talking about it and going, okay, that's kind of plugs into what they're already thinking about, and they can go and read it themselves. Like I hate podcasts and things that are a replacement for reading.
Me too.
Like there's plenty of old stuff that needs read, so you should it should just be integrating it with stuff we already know and pointing other people in the direction they can read it when it's right for them.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your thoughts on McGilchrist then? You've been reading him recently,
so far. So I'm kind of in the middle of it. But the first comment I'd make is that when I was doing research on this previously, I was looking up some technical papers, and I had a few books, the names of which escape me at the moment, which were a lot more kind of dry and factual. And one of the points I think he's making in his book is how that kind of diminishes neuroscience, or what neuroscience is trying to tell us, and in general what science is trying to tell us. And he sees that rampant reductionism and a reluctance to philosophize from the scientific knowledge that you get. So he argues that these days people practice science, but because we're so left brain dominant, quote unquote, again, it's not that simple, but we tend to just look at things in their barest component parts as if we're a machine or something like that. And there's a real reluctance, he's saying, that neuroscientists in general want to actually make claims based on the evidence that they've found, even to the point where when he said he wanted to go into this and start maybe looking at this problem of right and left brain consciousness, that people discourage him because they said, no, you can't do that. It's going to destroy your career. You can't look at that. That's not serious. This whole serious thing that people have in the scientific community, or they seem to anyway. So what I like about the book so far is that he's one of those rare instances where someone has gone and done research, has looked at the technical, biological, hard reductionist scientific elements, and then he's taken that and pretty courageously just gone out on a limb and said that this is what I think the implications are. And I really appreciate people that do that. So few people do that these days. We just stick to the component parts. We just say like, oh, this is what it does, and that's it. That's a utility. That's a materialist utility, and you can't say anything else about it because we just know this. That's it, and I'm not willing to say anything else about the matter. And if you say something about it, you're a pseudo-scientist or a quack or a lunatic. But this book, he doesn't seem to care about that, and I have appreciated that so far. Because I think science is a bit lost in that respect. Today, it seems to be all about the component parts, the optimization, like how can you optimize your day with science kind of thing. And you look at these little tiny bits, but very rarely do popular scientists anyway focus on like the entire picture, which ironically ties into the exact subject matter itself, which is left brain being component reductionist, right brain also having language and symbol abilities apparently, which I didn't really realize, but I guess having a grasp of the entire picture rather than, the way that we view things these days, because of course he makes the argument that we have an asymmetry towards being left brain dominant. And that's particularly happened over the last 500 or 600 years, in his opinion. And, what I found interesting just on that point is I've always considered high IQ to be almost like a kind of mental illness. And most of the people I've seen with a really high IQ, I'm like, man, this guy's like fucking off with the fairies. Really good at certain things, but just I think that as a society, we have this kind of definite problem with reductionism, and we're not willing to take ourselves out of that. And this book does a fantastic job, I think, of just contextualizing that whole problem that we face due to this left brain dominance. I don't know if you think along the same lines on that or not. Admittedly, I've not finished the whole thing yet, about halfway through, but that's what I've picked up so far.
The book explains a lot of the culture at the moment. You will see it basically. If you read this book, you will see the ideas everywhere, and it will never go away for you. You'll keep seeing it forever. That's the biggest recommendation I can give the book. In terms of left and right brain, there's a danger of when people read it that they end up thinking that it's right brain good guy, left brain bad guy.
Sure.
Which isn't what he's saying at all. He has an extremely well developed left hemisphere way of doing things, as well as the right hemisphere.
Yeah.
A lot of his followers and fans don't, in my view. So like the left, the hemisphere is reductionist and break things into parts and all those things, but it's a necessary part of a process. It's the middle part of a process. It's not meant to be either or. So what he's really saying in the book is you're meant to go from you start at the right hemisphere way of knowing the world anyway, and he gives evidence for that. And then the left hemisphere way of knowing things is useful as a sort of middle stage for surviving, for living, for understanding things. And then the healthy brain, the healthy person will bring that back to the right hemisphere, to the whole again. So you're going from the whole, breaking it into parts and bringing it back to the whole again. But the whole will be bigger and more enriched and more useful now, and just better because you've understand it more. But that's healthy if you do the process of right to left to right. What is the problem in the culture is people have got stuck in the left. The left way of doing things has become an end in itself. It's like we were talking about with language. It's just gone round in circles in words and not taking it back to the real world again. So this also ties in well with Alfred Korzybski, actually.
Oh yeah,
his
absolutely.
book. They really go together. And McGilchrist is aware of Korzybski because I saw him do a talk at the Institute of General Semantics. He's not like an expert on it or a heavy reader of it or that, but he was invited to do a talk there because they've obviously saw the connections as well, and there is big connections with it. They're both similar guys. One central idea applied to everything. The type of books you need to read at minimum of 3 times and then spend a long time thinking about and integrating it with other stuff. Good books, in other words, that both take 10, 20 years to write, writing and thinking, you know, like all the best books.
Yeah.
So, so there's 2 ways I've kind of applied it. One is understanding what's going on in the culture better, but going, oh, okay, so these things that are problematic where people are way too just over-analyzing things and stuck in words. Okay, that's the left hemisphere ran amok, and it's
could
not
I just say something on
forth.
that just quickly? Well, because there was one quote in particular that he just really struck me about the left brain that I'd not heard before. He speaks about the left brain as having like this enlarged capacity for optimism, and it's really good at denying reality, really good at it. And he explains this by saying that there are people with strokes, and just one side of their brain has had a stroke, so the right side of their brain, and they deny that there's anything wrong with them. So they may have limbs that don't work, or there could be something really terrible going on with their body as a result of the stroke, but they'll deny it because
there are people who've only their left hemisphere is currently working.
Yeah.
So either it's from an operation or an accident or something, and then if you've only got the left hemisphere working, for most people it's the left hemisphere, the 90-something%. If you only have it working, it will behave and come to conclusions differently than only the right brain working will do. So this is how you know they really are different. They're physically different. There's 2, you can look at a brain, there's 2 big sections that are separated with quite a small connection in the middle. They're separated for a reason. He uses the example of birds. Birds need 2 ways of knowing the world. They need to have an alert. They need to have one part of their mind that is aware of the whole, so so while they're looking for food, it's aware of the whole and can be vigilant for predators. And they have another part of their brain that is can focus on the individual parts and discriminate differences between things. So it can find a piece of food in the like a piece of grain in the ground, in the stones in the ground or something. But you need both of these happening at the same time, and they conflict with each other, but you need both to survive and to live. And so birds have the double hemisphere as well. So if one side isn't working, you will behave differently than if the other side isn't working. It's like just factual in the book. There's just hundreds of papers and examples of this. It's amazing that it's gone so long that they just pretended this wasn't a thing.
It's incredible.
And just like,
it's incredible.
Partly it's justified because both sides of the brain are involved in doing everything more or less. Yeah. But they have McGilchrist really clear on that it's a different way of how they do things. It's not what they do that's different, it's how they do them. So one's left to its own devices, it will do things in a different way than the other one.
Yeah.
And the healthy person has the right relationship between both, which for McGilchrist is right to left and then back to right. And that's the kind of process you go through, or you could say acting in the world, silence in the real world, and then turning it into words and language, which then helps you do things again in the real world. So you could go silence to speech, back to silence. It would be another way of saying it, or the whole to the parts to the whole.
Yeah.
The other way I've applied this is I apply that to the posture work, constantly going back from the whole to the parts, back to the whole with people. And the other one is just in general, it's interesting and fascinating to look at how which mode are you in at any point in time? Are you really focused on some tiny little details and being neurotic about little details, or are you kind of just spaced out and taking in the whole? Different times you need one more than the other. It's not like there's a good guy, bad guy. That's the mistake lots of the followers make. I'm going to keep repeating myself about this, but they just really have this anti-left brain thing, and almost always those people don't have a very good left brain. Tells you something.
Yeah.
McGilchrist has an amazing left brain. He's like hundreds of qualifications in the books and everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the danger of it when people get it.
Yeah.
So
I think the opposite's true as well. Yeah. So people with a terrible right brain tend to be very left brain centric. I've noticed online.
Yes, I mean that's what he's going against that in the book.
Sure.
The whole book is against that because that's the current
dominant
culture.
thing,
So
yeah.
it's like the pendulum thing I've talked about before. It's like it was swung too far to the left brain. He's having to address that. So it's obviously is going to be more pro right brain. Like in the way he talks, in the emphasis.
Yeah.
And then so people just, it swung too far the other way, and now everyone's interested in, you know, like letting things happen and embodiment and all that stuff, and they're just trying to throw away those pesky words in their head rather than learn to use them properly as proper tools, in my view. So I've found myself now focusing on the other way, trying to develop a stronger, better left hemisphere way of doing things that is integrated back into the right hemisphere way of doing things.
Sure. Yeah.
Not that I've succeeded, but that's what I'm working on.
It's a slippery slope. It kind of reminds me of Buddhist philosophy. Like, I always find that the Buddha's vindicated pretty much every time I read a book like this. I'm like, fuck, he was right in his own, ancient way. But I often think like there's this kind of paradox with this as well, though. This is where there's a slippery slope, because very often, like, the models of behavior that we come up with as people are constructed by, I guess you could say, the left brain. They're like reductionist philosophies or ways of trying to fix a problem. And then if you act based on that, then in a sense, you're still acting as a result of what the left brain has deemed to be the right way to act. So there's kind of like a paradox. Can you ever get out of that? Like, I was thinking about it the other day. So if, for example, I'm just trying to think of a good way to put it. If your philosophy, like some Eastern mystics, for example, is the denying that reality is real and it's simply an act of hallucination, for example, which is in vogue in some places. In order to think that, in order to have a theory that that's the case, that is itself a product of the left brain. And it's only half the story. So in trying to get away from the left brain by denying that experience is real or reality is real, that itself is a product of what's going on in the left brain. And the whole time, as far as I can tell, the right brain is being discluded from the analysis. I think that's kind of like a possible danger of dealing with this kind of work, potentially.
What do you mean, this kind of dealing with it? Do you mean the book itself, or you mean working on yourself?
Yeah, working on yourself, to clarify. And particular, these Eastern mystic paths that are at once kind of highly intellectual and reality denying in particular. When people get too attached to these models, I feel as if they themselves are a product of the left brain. So the one thing that they're trying to transcend, even if they're not aware that that's what they're trying to do, they can become entangled in this kind of paradox that all these things are a construction of the left brain itself anyway. Yet they're designed to try and overcome that very problem. I hope that makes sense.
You could also say that's depending on which tradition, but their understanding of the limited self that they're trying to transcend, it itself is a left hemisphere conclusion about themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a conception they have of themselves that's a left hemisphere thing, and you can't get out of that conception by understanding it more and being inside it and moving around it. It's like you have to get outside of that entirely.
Which is why the Buddha, in those old stories, I think that typically someone will come up and ask a question, and I'm sure there's other sages through history where this was the case as well. But he'd just constantly say, "Not that, not that." And it was like his answer all the time was like, "No, not that." And admittedly, that had a purpose in a tradition and in a there's a danger here, and that we should be careful as people who utilize these ideas, that we're not really just introducing another level of reductionism, or what we're doing is not a product of the very thing we're trying to temper, not overcome, but temper. Just something I've taken away so far.
I mean, a lot of the Western Buddhists are just absolutely obsessed with models and stages and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But also, like, different traditions and different practices appeal to a different type of person. The type of person who's already more of a left brain or a right brain. You also. So if people are more naturally kind of that kind of embodied feeling type of person, or they're more likely to go to practices like that. If they're a kind of hyper analytical person, they're more likely to do something like Vipassana with all the maps, which is what you find. You find all the Silicon Valley bros, it's all Vipassana they tend to do, because they're a hyper rationalist. They're looking for the maps and things like that.
Yeah.
So they're more attracted to those things naturally, and sometimes it's the right thing for them. But for a lot of people, they just get stuck because they're just going round in the circles. Like you say, it's just another trap. There's just new words, and they can feel superior because they're doing some interesting thing, or they can go to the retreat and maybe pick up a chick at the end of it or something. Like they have all these different things that are really going on while they're kidding themselves on that there's some kind of spiritual insight into reality, or however they say it now.
Totally.
Whereas there's other practices which is completely the other side of this, where it's all about you're starting from the wholeness, and you're trying to get away from those things. So not that. That's the person. Is the question? Is this the person? The person is really just presenting their model of reality, their left hemisphere's dreamt up model of reality, and then the guys, well, it's not that. It's not that. You can just say not that to all of it, because what it is they're seeking is outside of those models.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you can't use models to help you reach beyond the models, but you can't do that inside each model.
Yeah, exactly. The model itself isn't going to be the thing that reveals the experience of truth.
That,
yeah, exactly.
If I was a mathematician, I could go into Gödel or something just now, but I not. But like you have to transcend you have to just get outside of it. You have to. This is self-overcoming. If people like Nietzsche, this is what it is. You're not just self-overcoming, but self-concept overcoming. And you're stepping into the unknown. Which is associated with right hemisphere way of thinking and knowing the world. You're open to the new things. You're not trying to get everything down to something already known. The right hemisphere is more interested in the becoming rather than the become. So it's more about like the new things, the transformations, the time, whereas the left hemisphere is trying to nail everything down into a system that all fits together and can be understood as like a whole, and is somehow outside of time and space, that is kind of true forever. But the right hemisphere is not really like that. These are just meant to be tools. It's like you make a hammer to use as a tool. You don't start thinking the whole world is a hammer. But people do.
Do you
when it comes to hemisphere stuff?
Yeah, I agree. To build on this, I found that idea that the optimism and the denial of reality thing was just like that was mind blowing, because I just never heard anyone describe it that way. And then I looked at Western civilization, but I guess it's applicable pretty much to everywhere these days. And what are we? We're optimistic somehow, and we also completely deny reality for the large part. Like people have all interesting ways that they deny reality. In particular, I guess you could argue that the progressives, who probably have an optimistic philosophy, are the worst offenders at denying reality at the moment. And I just found that fascinating. And I found it fascinating that he made the argument that this tendency has become stronger over the last 500 or 600 years. And it's incredible to me to think that everything that ails us, on Twitter, we have all these stories and narratives and explanations as to why the things are a certain way. And all these models, and again, there may be some truth to those things, but in a way, it's really amazing that a lot of that could simply be derived from a physiological change in the human brain. It could just be that, and it could just be a fundamental misunderstanding of what we are and how we function.
Yeah, so for people who haven't read the book, the last section, he's applying the different ways the brain, the two sides of the brain works. He's applying this not just to the person himself or to philosophical ideas, but he's actually showing how at different stages in cultures and in history, it seems like they were more right brain dominant at one time and then more left brain dominant another time. And he picks times that seem to show that, like the times you'd look at as the best times, like the Renaissance or certain time in ancient Greece or whatever, you would like at their peak, it's right brain, left brain working in concert together the right way, and then it usually is followed by too much left. That's roughly what he's saying, if I remember right. So it's very like what I would call psychophysical way of viewing the world, where what's going on in your body and how your body and your body mind is working is reflected and expressed in the world around you. You're not like it's the whole organism in the environment is all transforming each other at the same time. So if you were in a left brain dominant culture, which we are now, and that's what the book is about, partly about, you would expect to see things like overconfidence in technologies to solve everything, denial of mortality, obsession over details, just treating everything like a machine, including people, treating the world, the environment like a machine, like to be, just to extract and use, like philosophers have dealt, there's various philosophers have dealt with these issues as well. But the McGilchrist thing is interesting because he's tying it back to the two different ways of the brain. So there's it's a real factual basis to this stuff. It's not just metaphors about the way the world works based on your preference. There does seem to be some kind of foundation for the different things you'll see in different cultures, and different cultures have a more emphasis on one or the other. Different cultures, civilizations at different stages of the civilization will have more emphasis on one or the other. And his kind of thesis is that we've gone way too far the left direction now in the West, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling thing now. It's kind of it's like in a feedback loop with itself now, and it's pretty hard to get out of.
Yeah, he talks a lot about environmental destruction in particular. And I guess us as part of that environment, it's difficult to separate the two things. And as you say, there is probably going to be an inevitable conclusion to that, which I think a lot of people that I've read tend to agree with that.
So like another thing is the right brain is more associated with kind of a pessimistic view of life. You were saying left brain more optimistic, but the right brain is more like actively pessimistic. You're more likely to have negative emotions, sadness, or these things are more connected with the right brain. So, one thing he said was he was talking about how emotions are connected with or integrated with the right brain or left brain, and there's one emotion that's more connected with the left brain than the right brain. All of them are more to the right brain apart from one. And if anyone can guess what it is, it's anger. So this is why people who are ultra rationalist people or ultra progressive people, when they don't get it their way or think the world isn't agreeing with them, they get extremely angry about it, because that's the emotion that's tied in with the side of the way of knowing the side of the brain they're using most. So it's the autist temper tantrums is one thing. The opposite extreme is the overly right brain person who's just swamped by emotions and can't function in the world and can't do anything logically and is just totally spaced out in that. It has its own set of problems. But as I say, the book is kind of we're already in the left culture, so he's trying to left brain culture, where people start misunderstanding what I'm saying. But he's also already in the left brain kind of culture, so he's having to work against that. And I find myself just at this point emphasizing more the left hemisphere again now, because I'm having to rebel against the rebels a little bit, because the pendulum swung too far the other way. I think I've said that in every single podcast now.
Does he have much to say about like what an example of a right brain society might be, like a right brain dominant one, and what kind of problems that kind of civilization would have?
So like when he tries to show which cultures are and aren't right brained or left brain, he analyzes things like the art, how they put the art. So it's certain, because your left brain, for most people, your left side of your brain controls the right side of your body, and your right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. So like he analyzed, there's certain other people have done analysis of art and which side of the face is more prominent and stuff at different times, and he's kind of correlated that to other things that are more right-brained. So like they're emphasizing based on the way they show the bodies, they're emphasizing one of the side of the brain more. The relationship to money makes a difference and things like this. The Renaissance, I think, is one of the ones he talks about, where they have, there's the explosion of art and the creative visual stuff, treating the whole spiritual, like it's spiritual ideas, that kind of thing. But also it's not just like random explosion of emotion. It's constructed and molded into very, very specific and skillful arts that you have to be developed step by step. You don't just, there's a lot of work and training and craft and technology goes into these things as well. So periods like that where you have both happening together, both sides of the brain working together, you would just see a creative explosion. I think it's more complicated than this.
And what about the circumstances that would lead to an explosion like that? Does it go through what changed? Was it ecology, or there must have been something in the environment that I know that it coincides with warming periods, apparently, those kinds of explosions. But I just wonder, physiologically, I wonder what that's doing.
Yeah, I think he says in it that he kind of says, look, the change happens too quick for it to just be like a genetic thing, so that these people have different brains, so different from the other brain. I don't know enough about that to know how quickly those things can change. It's possible that there's just a tipping point where a certain types of bodies are slightly more right left, and then one of the things in the book is the left. Once the left starts, it gets into a feedback loop with itself, and it's like increases its own power, and it becomes harder to get out of. So there may just be a stage where it just triggers that, but I think it's probably. It will be related to the environment around people.
Yeah.
So like in different environments, you need to be more logical and planning ahead and step-by-step thinking. In other places, you don't need to be, because there's food all the time.
Sure.
There's food all year round. You just go around collecting it. You can be spaced out and wander about. You can spend all your time thinking about myths or whatever. Like it's different than if you're having to really plan your food and all this stuff now, because you'll starve later in the year if you don't. So those kind of things would emphasize left brain more than right brain. This is like in the you'll see in the, I don't know is this strictly true, but in the more northern mythologies, they tend to have like a start and finish to the world and things. There's like a beginning and an end point. And then in the sort of the older African mythologies, it's more just kind of, it just goes on and on and on forever. It's like, it's a more right-brained kind of mythology.
Yeah.
And the northern is more a left-brained. So that would tie in with environment for definite.
Yeah, makes sense.
I don't know what McGilchrist says. I can't remember, but that's just me speculating now.
Yeah. So I guess part of this is we're gonna tie this stuff in with, you know, maybe methods to power down this tendency that we all have. Does he in the book at any point go through like this? Does he have a methodology? Because you mentioned he had classes, and I assume therefore that he had some sort of maybe not entirely rational method of trying to get it all under control. Did he promote certain perceptual exercises, or is there some way that you can break out of this tendency towards reductionism?
I think I heard him talk about once exercise he was doing about try to focus your attention on one small spot while also at the same time keeping your alertness of the surroundings at the same time, you know? Mm-hmm. So you're kind of training the left and brain to work together. I don't know, does he do that formally or not, but I remember him mentioning it somewhere. And, you know, like he's getting bombarded by people with this saying, oh, this is like this, and, you know, this, you know, with different practices. Mm-hmm. So you'll be aware of a lot of the things that that seem to display this. He, you know, I saw him do a talk once years ago in England, and he was connecting it all to Taoism, you know, the yin yang. Connecting two sides of the brain with that made a bit of sense actually. So the left brain in that one would be the white, and the right brain, you know, the yang is the left brain, and the yin is the right brain. Yeah. So like the right brain's more about the, you know, the unseen and the darkness and the new things, and whereas the left brain and about sort of more passive, you know, like right brain way of viewing the world is more passive. You're just taking in what's about. Left brain is more active. You're doing things and manipulating the world. And, you know, your left hemisphere is really interconnected with your right hand, which for most people is your tool, your hand for using tools. So manipulating the world and the left brain go together for most people. And just kind of perceiving the world and feeling the world and being in the world and the right brain kind of go together. So it's interesting that a lot of, I noticed when I was young, I don't know if it's true or not, but I noticed the more artistic people in my school tended to be left-handed.
Yeah.
So I don't know, is that because their brain's slightly wired differently, so they made them more like that? That's anecdotal. I mean, I don't know. McGilchrist probably actually says this somewhere, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
It covers so much stuff in the book. I don't even remember what's in that book and what's not, and I don't remember what's my own idea and what's his, which is good because you know that's how you make a book your own. That's how you make it your own.
You've made it organic.
And this is why I hate. Yeah, and this is why I hate these. I hate the simplified summaries of books that you get because they treat people. Well, first of all, they dumb it down and treat people like they're idiots. But they also act like this is the first book they're ever going to read. Like, here's a book, and he does this and this and this. The person, if they're smart, and anyone listening to this is obviously smart, but not too high in IQ because you already said they're idiots. But anyone listening to this is already reading a bunch of books, has already had ideas they're working on, and they'll fit this into that thing anyway. They'll integrate it into their whole. So, like, that's a more right brain, right hemisphere kind of way of approaching reading anyway. But not too right-brained, or you'll just think you can just jump from book to book and just connect random ideas together, and they're not really connected. You need the left hemisphere discipline of reasoning things through and seeing how things connect and discriminating between things and going, okay, these two things are different. These are the things that work for practical purposes. These are the things that don't. You know, you need that kind of stuff as well.
It's important to notice as well, he's not against reality, so he's not actually denying the existence of reality, which sets him apart a little bit from other people in the current age who tend to go, you know, like maybe the Donald Hoffmans who we were discussing last week, who tend to say that, oh, reality is almost completely hallucinatory and illusory. He's not quite at that point from what I'm picking up. So he's more talking about how maybe in a Korzybski kind of sense, a reality is an abstraction. It's not that we're not seeing reality. We're just seeing a very, you know, segmented view of it. We're not seeing the entire thing. That does kind of separate him from a lot of, you know, neuroscientists I've noticed are around today. I think it's
McGilchrist has a nice concept in the book called betweenness. So rather than saying there's no external world, rather than being like it's all internal, it's all like idealist, or that you're just like completely materialist, physical world only. Rather than saying that, he's kind of saying, he calls it betweenness, where it's the interplay between whatever we are with whatever is out there. So yeah, it ties in with Krzyzewski and where Krzyzewski's talking about models or like maps. The left hemisphere is what makes the maps. The right hemisphere is what deals with the territory, roughly.
Yeah.
So, but a map is useful and works if this has a similar structure to the real world, whatever it is, and it's a good map if it works. But the problem is everyone's just going round in circles with the maps and arguing about which map is best and not actually trying to use the map. So if the places are in the wrong order, it's not a useful map.
Yeah.
Or if it's a map if it's a good map, but it's not what you need here. So you're using the wrong set of symbols to deal with reality here. So it's really similar to Krzyzewski in that sense. And there's many books and people have talked about the same two, as McGilchrist talks about as well. They have talked about the two different ways of knowing with their own concepts and ways of talking about it. But he's the first person to go, no, there's a real basis to this. It's the brain. But even that's not as simple as that. It's not a materialist brain.
No.
It's the betweenness brain.
Yeah.
So,
you can't say either way.
Your brain is
it's the middle way.
It's already in the world, relating to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a middle way. Same as the Buddha, middle way, which I like. That appeals to me. Because if it wasn't the middle way, then it would just be the left brain way, right? Which is the thing you're trying to avoid. If it wasn't the middle way, it would just be the reductionist left brain way. You're just falling into that trap again, yeah? If you overanalyze things, then you're just falling back into that trap. So
yes,
the only...
To talk about...
I was just going to say the only way not to do that is this concept that you're just talking about now, this middle path of, what did you call it? Beingness. Was it beingness? Or
he calls it betweenness.
Betweenness, sorry. Yeah.
Betweenness, yeah. I was going to call my website that years ago, but the domain name had gone. So then I ended up choosing psychophysical, but I was going to take betweenness.
Yeah.
The other thing is you can go too far either way. So like, if you take the mystical stuff, so I don't know enough about Buddha and Buddhism really to tie it into McGilchrist, at least not here. I would have to think about it. But there are mystical stuff I would say is too far right brain. So and it's visible that they're too far in the right brain. As an example, there's some of the Indian stuff where it's literally just a guy in his pants sitting on the side of the street. He's gone so far in the right brain and living in the moment and is completely, like it's doing nothing, or the guy in the cave in bliss. This is like stuck in right brain and not doing anything with it. The opposite is the hyper, like the guy's trying to fix everything, the technocrat, and he's trying to fix everything, and he's got a system for everything, and everything's simple, and if everyone will just do it this way in this order, then everything will be fine. That's the
how to wake up in the morning, a thread.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you'll, like, in the sort of self-development internet culture, you'll see the left brain, right brain stuff everywhere. You'll see one group of people are like, just let it happen, man, live in the now, like get out of your own way and all that kind of stuff. And then there's the other ones who are like, here's the 10-step system, blah, blah, blah. They're both wrong. And they're a little bit right. They're both a little bit right also. So like it's the balance thing. Again, McGilchrist gets this right in my view. Not so much all of his followers.
So does he talk about physiology and how physiology ties into regulating the brain itself and how we use it? So for example, I'm just trying to tie it into what we're doing. And like, I know, for example, how breathing would theoretically change that, but I'm just wondering from his perspective, does he offer any thoughts on that in particular? Physiology and...
I don't remember, but he definitely talks about how the right brain is the more sort of embodied. It's, the right hemisphere is more interconnected with those things, and the sort of, like, one way of looking at the left brain, right brain thing is the right brain is more in the world, physiological feelings and sensations and that kind of thing, and whatever the new arrival of sensations and perceptions is. So you're in the moment, you're inside the moment, whereas the left brain is more like a detached, you're stepping back outside of it to take a view of it, like to look at the map. You're no longer looking in the hill, you're lost in the wilderness, you're no longer looking at the hills, you're now looking at the map. So I've forgotten what you asked. What did you ask?
Does he connect it to the physiology, the body?
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Well, yeah, he talks a little bit about that, I think. And his general thing is that a more right hemisphere way of doing things is as those things connected more. So, I mean, if you take breathing, there are old tantric exercises or one of the traditions where you breathe through one nostril and not the other.
Yeah.
What is this doing? This is literally making you change dominance of the sides of your brain. So, like, depending on which nostril, one side of the brain runs the other side of the body. So when you're breathing through separate nostrils for long enough, it'll change the dominance of your brain. All this stuff can be measured now, but they knew about this thousands of years ago. He doesn't talk about that. I'm remembering that. So there's loads of things here you could get into. There's a sort of modern Western Buddhist guy who talks about like there's I can't remember the words he uses. He kind of distinguishes between attention and awareness. So like attention is focused on a point, specific things, and awareness is sort of the wider thing.
Yeah.
So like that kind of wider awareness is kind of more associated with your body and your awareness and here in the moment right now. But one of the most interesting things was for me anyway was the fact that most of the emotions are tied in with the right brain more, apart from anger. And so you're automatically going to be feeling more and sensing differently if your right brain is dominant at any time compared to your left. Again, you need both at different times.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need both at the same time. Like I was saying earlier with the birds, you need to be alert. And I think that's what McGilchrist was talking about in that exercise, where you're training both the alertness and the focusing on a specific thing at the same time. And if you look at the traditions, they have these in practices. You focus on, like you're looking at the same sensations over and over and over again. Really focused, narrow focus on that. Or you might be the other traditions. It's more like opening up into a higher thing, or they use love. Some of the practices is about love because, what's love? It's opening up into a bigger thing. That's more right hemisphere. You don't need to. It's not like. It's just like factually more right hemisphere. It's not like metaphorical love, man. It's like, it's just opening out. It's opening out rather than closing down.
Yeah. So I do notice he has a chapter on the self, and unfortunately I didn't quite get to that prior to this. That topic fascinates me. In my own model of things, that particular concept is pretty important, I think. I think it's a good summary of at least partially what I think is important, which is, and we're going to get onto Hyatt soon, because Hyatt, this is where I got it from. Hyatt thinks that powering down self-conception is an important thing for humanity to try and do. And that's, of course, tied up with the misguided perception we have of what ourselves are. I haven't quite got to that chapter. I always thought that selfdom, like linguistic self-referential self, and I know it's more complicated than this. I don't want people in the comments to say, oh, that's not how it works, but I always associated it with symbol use and language in particular. But I do know it's far more complicated than that. And we already spoke about the default mode network, I think, in a previous episode. Does he go into that? I'm desperate to know, but I haven't got to that part yet. And how that fits in with the left and right brain. Do you remember? Might be a bit long ago.
I don't remember if it's specific. Like, I don't remember what's in the book and what I've seen him talk about in videos. You know, where like in interviews and stuff, where he's asked this type of question.
Yeah.
So I know he definitely talks about it, and he talks about the soul as well. You know, the soul is a right hemisphere way of thinking about this, and it's dismissed by the left because where is it? You can't see it and nail it down and make it explicit. You know, so the left wants to make everything explicit and defined and separate from everything. Some things aren't like that. Yeah. Some things don't work like that, and the right brain is more about the implicit and things that are already in there, and the purpose of the left brain is to unpack what's in the right brain, but then send it back to the right brain, which is where people go wrong. They're not doing that. I think in his second book he talks more about this kind of stuff, but I haven't read his second book. I just read his other book multiple times. The second book's more, I think, philosophical and goes into this kind of stuff. I think
found something here. So he says, I believe the essential difference between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere is that the right hemisphere pays attention to the other. And sorry, this is just in terms of self. So the right hemisphere pays attention to the other, where whatever it is that exists apart from ourselves, with which it sees itself in profound relation, it is deeply attracted to and given life by the relationship, the betweenness that exists with this other. By contrast, the left hemisphere pays attention to the virtual world that it has created, which is self-consistent but self-contained, ultimately disconnected from the other, making it powerful but ultimately only able to operate on and know itself. So yeah, I think that does tie in with what I think about the self, actually. Just reading that paragraph there. That's interesting.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah.
So carry on about that, about what you think about the self.
Yeah, so I think, so I guess just thinking through what he said there, I think that the virtual model that the self creates is very important. And we've spoken about reductionism and how an obsession with reductionism, usually we use concepts and language to reduce things in our everyday life. And that's intimately tied up with our self-perception, or what I guess he's describing here is this left brain notion of selfdom, which is all the things that we create and consider ourselves separate from everything else. It seems to be what he's saying here. Admittedly, I've not read this chapter yet. So I've always thought that tendency in us is, first of all, it's self-destructive, usually self-destructive if it's out of control, because we don't, again, it's one of these things that we don't really understand. We don't understand what's going on around us. We don't understand how we're processing the world. And we don't understand what our self is really for. And so a lot of psychological pain, a lot of delusion, a lot of all these different things, I think are intimately tied up with that element of selfdom. Of course, you have to be a little bit careful, right? Because the self, that's a huge word. That could mean like a million different things. But what I guess what I'm talking about is this language-based self that feels separate, and what I'm arguing from my experiences with meditation and various other things is that realizing that is in some sense, I guess, a reductive illusion. It is kind of illusory. It's a rather late feature that's evolved in us. And I do think that having it is clearly important. That's why it evolved, right? But I do think that it creates a lot more trouble for you. Not a lot more, but it creates a lot of trouble for you as well. And so, like, a lot of meditation work that I undertake, for example, is just opening myself up to the to the right brain experience, I guess you could say, which sounds a bit cheesy. And the aim of that is powering down that language-based reductionist self, because it is entirely possible to notice that it's ephemeral. It's not really there like we think it's there. It's kind of an ephemeral, insubstantial, not a hallucination, more like a mirage. You're kind of like in a desert, and the more you look at it, you get closer and closer, and you realize it's not actually there. I think that's the best metaphor to describe what's going on with that left brain self, in my opinion. So I think that this all ties into everything that we're talking about here. It ties in with this left brain dominance, this optimism and inability to accept reality. I think in some way of speaking, the way to overcome that is to literally power down that element in ourselves, to consciously question it, and not overcome it, but just to notice what it really is, I think is critical, because it is fairly insubstantial. And actually, I think the more I think about it, I do think the mirage metaphor is very good, because the more you look for it, you just realize it's not there. And I actually think that is probably the primary goal of most meditation practice, the more I think about it. But I do think...
Take one,
sorry, just quickly.
Think one sorry.
Yeah. So I do think that, and I guess we'll get on to Heidegger a bit later, but he always spoke about, well, at least Calvin told me this, that he thought that the idea of the self, or not the idea of it, but that the experience of the self that people have is actually holding us back to a large degree. And the reason it's holding us back is because we don't really understand what it is. And the best way to understand what it is to do some sort of introspective practice where we can look at it for what it is and try to really understand what it is. And from what I'm reading in this book, that's intimately tied up with this left brain tendency towards reductionism, tendency towards modeling and concepts. And all these things, I think, are tied up with this experience of the self. We tend to get attached to these things, and we tend to mistake, as you were saying before, the map for the territory. And I think that all these elements are tied together. They're all kind of the same thing, the same phenomenon, and that there are actually methods that are very ancient of noticing what's really going on. And in a sense, then you are powering down that experience in a way that you start to control it rather than it controlling you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So like say you're doing a specific practice that is about like your self-inquiry. You're trying to see what's this I, this me thing inside me. What is it? So you're starting to, you're meditating on this, you're looking at this, contemplating it. At some point, you're just trying to look at what's happening, about how the images and the words are arising in your mind, or this, you think about, I used to do this one a lot. You just say I, you get the feeling of I am, and then look, where is this? Where did that happen? What happens is when you're looking at that is you find yourself thinking about that. So you're trying to see what the self really is, but you're now back in your old limited self. You're inside that model. You're thinking about it, although you think you deceive yourself into thinking you've now transcended it because you're thinking about it. But really, you're just it's self going round in a circle. So like you kind of need to.
Yeah, I think, but that is itself the very challenge of meditation, and you see that in all the traditions. They all talk about that. So yeah, there's definitely a very real capacity to fall back into it. But I don't
think about like an aha moment. Like say when you're sometimes you get like, if you have an aha moment, so you're struggling with something, you're thinking about this idea, you're just going round and round in circles, and you're getting really frustrated, and you're trying to piece it together, and it doesn't make sense. Then all of a sudden you have this, now I get, you just get it all in one go. You transcend those old models, and now you have a new model. That's what has happened in an aha experience. You suddenly get it. You see it differently. You're outside of the old map. You have a bigger map, or you're outside of that model, and that's a very experiential intuitive, whole-bodied, whole environment thing that just happens to you in a moment of insight or whatever.
Yeah.
And then after that, then you can spend ages unpacking that and reasoning it out and making sense of it. But the actual experience was not done inside the old models, your old so if this is in meditating, your aha moment would be like an awakening. So you've just popped outside of the old struggle. And you think when people are meditating, they're struggling all the time. They're fidgeting, their mind is sore, they're going around in their head, they're having all these emotions. It's struggle, and then one day pop, and they just have this, they step outside of it or transcend it, however you want to say it.
Think
and
the best way
same thing. It's the same process that's happening to do with overcoming your self-concepts. The same process, I think, when you have a scientific breakthrough and you have an aha moment, when you finally get a joke that you couldn't get the joke, and then you suddenly get the joke. All these things where it just happens all at once, and you've transcended the old limitation. You may have now a new limitation that needs transcended. It doesn't mean you're now got it all sorted out.
I think it's a
process.
I think it's a little bit different though. So I think that there is a space and there is a realization that is always there, that doesn't require any overcoming or any. You can derive a new model from it, but nevertheless, if you go and meditate, you can have the experience all the time. It's always there because it's the same realization. There's no levels. It's just that experience.
Oh, you mean like the silent awareness, silent knowing thing behind
which is what I'm saying. So I think that place maybe that's the place that you can rest. That is not beyond experience. It is experience. It is just reflecting experience. That's the mental space that you're in at that time. So it's not really that you're overcoming something or you're having an epiphany or a realization. It is just always there, and it's just we just normally don't notice it. And that if we do,
this is a good analogy for right brain, left brain. That goes with the right brain, and then so you could say from the universal mind's point of view that the existence and the whole world that's its left hemisphere making models, trying to make sense of the fact that it's of what's happening as the whole right hemisphere behind it. It's not the same, but it's like similar.
Yeah, similar. And I think the more that you do that, the more that you're able to access that space, you tend to develop a more reasonable view of what selfdom is, in the sense that you become less attached to things that you used to get attached to a lot. And I think it's actually a very good method for, it's why I say powering down the self. I think it's literally what's happening. And I see that as a useful tool to really not getting rid of the left brain reductionism and conceptualization and stuff like that, but keeping it under control better, which is, for me, the key to integrating all these different things is having techniques where you can go there and then exercise again, it's not the best way to put it, but exercise your will over these various things that are happening within you as much as you can. And again, I do think the self, that type of self-reference, you can have that experience where it becomes less influential over you, and you become less reactive in general, and you become more able to determine what you want to do. You have more options available to you at any one time. And in a way, I think where people get confused is I think that there's levels. Like I've just transcended another level, so now there's another level to go onto and another level to go onto. But that in itself is the actual that's the very thing that's a tendency you're trying to overcome. But what I noticed after 15 years of doing that, and finally having a realization that was partially dialectically induced, ironically enough, but partially sitting on a cushion, I was like, I can just be here, and I don't need to impose anything on this space. This is just where I get to rest. And when you're in that space, all the things that we consider ourselves, so all the sensations, all the words, the thoughts, the feelings, all the various things that arise within us, you can just sit there and calmly observe these things from a distance, because they're just a part of experience. And what you notice is there's no homunculus pulling levers inside your brain. There's no central point to it all. It's just this cloud of sensation, cloud of energy that's spontaneously arising all at once. And your awareness is a bit like a mirror. It's just reflecting the stuff that's happening. And there's no space for a self in that. There's no self there. You can't find one. I'm not denying that there is some kind of greater self, like my body and the fact it's put all together and all that stuff. And I do seem to have some sort of self-referential experience. But I'm speaking more specifically about that language-based self, that kind of goes away. But there's nowhere to go from there. That's it. There's no other level. That's just a place where you can be and you can relax and you can observe and you can watch. And the more that you do that, the better you get at that. I find the effect is being you get less hung up with stuff, just in general. You get less attached to things because you're like, well, that's just some shit that's happening. Like, I didn't make that happen. Like, that's just something that's happening. That's experience coming up, over which no matter how I model it, no matter how much I reduce it to its component parts, that's not of myself. And that's the inherent illusion with the left brain and the reductionist self, is it doesn't really have much to do with anything. As far as I can tell from my meditation practice, it's kind of just grabbing onto stuff. It'll like grab onto something that just is happening. It's just stuff that's happening. And it'll grab onto some bits. It'll put together a narrative and a story and do all this stuff. And then if people don't have any of this knowledge or any of this meditational experience, they tend to mistake that for absolute reality. They mistake it for something that's coming out of them in some sense, like a self, how would you say, like a self-created experience. But I guess what I'm saying is, I think that is illusory. And what meditation should teach you is about the illusoriness of that experience.
It's not that it's not real. It's that your understanding of what it is illusory.
It's different.
You know, like there is an experience of thinking.
That's what I mean about the mirage.
Separate thing.
Yeah, the mirage metaphor is a very good one. So it's like going into
but it isn't a separate thing. It's not there like that.
Yeah.
Maybe just a phase that you have to go through as a human. You have to develop this, and then it's a natural phase. You know, the child needs to, has to think of himself as separate from other people in order to function and become a person.
Yeah, I think so.
And then maybe part of this process is later in life you're meant to get rid of that or overcome that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's probably it's definitely an evolved feature, but it is also the cause of pretty much everyone's pain, is because they don't really understand that it's largely impersonal. It's a kind of impersonal experience in some way, and it's as I said, the metaphor of it being a mirage is a really good one. That's really spot on in what I experienced to be the case. So you think it's there all the time. You look off into the distance and you're like, oh, thank God there's some water over there. And the closer you get to it, the closer you observe it, it just disappears. There's nothing there. And that experience, I think, is useful. And I also think that it ties into what this guy's saying. He's, making an argument that the dominance of that feature, even if that's just one of the features that he's talking about, is one of the problems with our civilization at large. And I agree. If you look at what ails people today, everything is so self-referential. It's so narcissistic. It's like, I'm this is my identity is this. Like, they're just constantly fucking talking about what their identity is. Whereas I make the argument they should be talking about what their identity is not, to be honest, because it's just, there's not a whole lot to it. It's fairly insubstantial. And a lot of the stuff, a lot of the pain that it causes us as individuals is completely unnecessary. And you can train yourself not to be affected in the same way that people who are untrained are affected by it. So those are just some thoughts trying to tie together his idea, or what I think his idea is. Are you there?
Yeah, well, one thing for me, the betweenness, the meditation stuff gave me an example of what he was meaning by betweenness and changing how you relate to the external world or to the other, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
Is before meditation, in general, I was doing tons of different things, so it's not one thing. But before that, and again, this is only something I realized after reflecting back, but before that, my awareness of myself was very, to make it embodied sounding, the awareness of myself felt very tightly inside my head, behind my eyes, behind my nose. Kind of, there's an area there where I was living, and then there was the outside world separated on the outside. After I'd, made some progress in meditation, at one point that just flipped, and the general feeling of where I was spatially, instead of it being behind my head, was like more outside, and the things were happening outside of me. So like my self feels more like that now. So it's the things going on around me, more in my environment. It's the betweenness.
It is, yeah.
Whereas before it was an invented pretend solidity of the self behind my head. And obviously if you keep looking, I am where I am, like it isn't there like that. But this is very spatial for me, a very spatial change. So like I was in there, like clenched in behind your head, and behind my face. For some people, it's more kind of in their chest. They have it more in their chest, or sometimes stomach, depends on the person. And then the meditation, then it was more involved the outside, and it just like my mind got bigger. Is the only way of saying it. Like it's just a bigger version.
Yeah.
But spatially on the outside, that really ties in McGilchrist's hemisphere stuff and betweenness and having a different relation with what's going on outside you, rather than that self-referential going round in circles, which really was like a sort of tense, like a tight tension, ball of tension in your face, which is made up by you.
Yeah, yeah.
You added all your thinking, created that over time, and then it's kind of you're releasing. And when you get out of that, it's like relief. You suddenly have all this energy. Holy shit! I was using all this energy just to tell all these little stories to myself and to make myself separate, when in one way I'm not separate at all, and in another way, well, I'm having a separate stream of experiences through time than other people, obviously, but they're interconnected and depend on each other in a way that I didn't realize before, because I was trying to tell myself that I was a separate thing from it. So like in total practical terms, when that happened, I suddenly found myself more able to to speak to people face to face without social tensions and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I was no longer referring everything back to me in my head. Oh no, this is awkward. What will I say next on this guy's doing? Like, oh, he's doing like. I just went away and just what's happening is happening.
Yeah.
You're more outside of your head. So, and this is ties in. I've heard a lot of people describe similar things.
Yeah.
It's not like, you know, it's, you don't even need to be doing meditation really. Some people already have this, I think.
Yeah, you think?
You know, yeah, I think a guy in the woods, watching the stream, watching the river.
Yeah, for sure.
You already have it. I heard a Buddhist teacher talk about either him or one of his pupils met this old woman in a park, and she was every day. They were going to the park every day, and they saw this old woman was just sitting there on a bench, just staring into space, you know, totally spaced out. So eventually they got in a conversation, said to her, you know, what are you doing? What's going on? And the woman said, oh, I don't know. Just one day my mind just got big. So every day I've been coming here and just enjoying looking at the birds and the trees and whatever. That was her description. Her mind just suddenly got big. It's the same thing I'm describing. Yeah. It's that you've transcended that old, tight, limited version of yourself, which was like a self-referential thing going on inside your head, like spatially inside your head. And then it just becomes that you're just yourself as this thing going on around you. So it's not like, I mean, I don't think I am the computer screen and the wall and things around me. You know, I'm not like mad. But I also don't think they're separate, because my awareness of those things is part of what I am. You know, that is the stream of me. So like, but you know, I don't think I'm one with everything like that, because I have this stream of experiences, you have your stream of experiences, but they're not separate. The streams aren't separate in some mysterious way for us. And the whole left brain, right brain thing is the right hemisphere way understands those connections and that wholeness that can't be put into words. That's kind of the point. It's pre-verbal. Whereas the left brain is unpacking it and trying to make it verbal as a tool, probably evolved as a tool, as a literal tool of the brain, or maybe I don't know. And then we just got stuck in that, rather than it being the middle stage of a process. It became an end in itself.
Yeah, you know, a lot of guys online, I've seen people like particular religious types, and I just want to clarify a few things, because this kind of experience often gets tied up with demons and supernatural evil and various other things that really trigger me. But there's nothing inherently so I think that they have a wrong conception of what we're talking about, and I hope this little discussion has maybe clarified what we mean. But a lot of people look at this kind of work and they're like, well, I mean, my sense of self is real and eternal, and if I lose it, then everything is over, and I'm going to go to hell and get stabbed with fucking pitchforks or whatever other shit these people believe in. But it's not, so it's not correct, because in a way, I guess what we're saying is the thing that you think is there is not really actually there in the way that you think it is. And that once you realize that, it's not like you disappear to some Deva realm or something like that, or maybe some people do, I don't know, but I certainly haven't. You're still, for all intents and purposes, still there. It's just that you are not, as Kevin was saying, you're not contracted. Like there's a contraction associated with being a hardcore, obsessed self in the body. Contraction, as he was saying, that is concentrated between the eyes in a lot of people, definitely was for me as well. In other cultures, I believe that they're centered in other places, I've heard. Don't know if that's true or not. But it's more a case of not destroying something that's there, or something that's holy and stable and eternal. It's more just that you're just noticing that what you think it is probably incorrect. It's probably a bit of a mirage, and that actually there are more benefits to that than there aren't. And I'm not saying that people can't have negative experiences surrounding this, because I've heard that they can. You know, some people may be somewhat crazy and they may freak out or just fucking not be able to handle the experience. Fair enough. There are probably some dangers associated with this. But overall, I think that it's just a positive experience, and life becomes much easier to take, and that things become less personal, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. And as Kevin was saying, it frees up a ton of energy, like all this energy that you had contracted physiologically that, you know, I'm fucking behind my eyes, man. Like I've got to argue with all these people online. I've got to, you know, go through life being aggressive and just all this stuff. This is energy that's kind of bound up. It's bound up and sustaining this kind of illusion in your physiology. And that once you just relax into it and you just let it go, and when you truly see it, ironically, that frees up a ton of energy that you can use for activities for yourself. Ironically. So there's nothing evil. There's nothing devilish. There's nothing like hellish or just all the other weird shit that I see people talk about online. It is mostly a fairly positive experience, almost unanimously positive, with all the people I've met that have experienced something similar, with a few exceptions.
You're meaning people though have made progress though, aren't you? You're who've got somewhere with it, not people who are still struggling with it.
Of course,
people in the start could be.
Of course, I think
it could be very negative and make them go mad.
It could go mad
for a few people.
You know, the thing is though, I think this is a whole other thing.
Once it happens, it's incontrovertibly better than the way before. You would never go back to the way before.
Absolutely, yeah, you can't argue with it. It's important to find a good teacher. That's all I'm going to say. You need to find someone that has some idea of what the experience is and can guide you through it. Because yeah, you're right, Kevin. You could. Well, I did. I spent 15 years sitting on a fucking couch, not going crazy, but not getting it either, just wasting my time. And you know, a good teacher probably could have, you know, really not explained it to me, but probably got me there fairly quickly. Actually. But it's one of the shortcomings.
You get these stories of the guru who, like the guru who just his presence with the person makes the person have an awakening and stuff.
Like
I think
Punjab,
that is a kind of could probably be measured in left brain, right brain terms if you had the equipment at that point in time.
No doubt.
Because if somebody is more right brain dominant around you, you can't demonstrate this obviously, but I think you're probably, depending on many other factors, you would be influenced into that too. Hypnosis is probably part of this, a big thing that will be going on in hypnosis, and it's infecting the person beside you, and also left hemisphere dominant stuff totally affects. You know, if people start talking about things and everything's a machine, you just automatically get drawn into that, and you start thinking about humans as a machine, and the left is on its way. So the person around you can affect you. So I think maybe what's going on with those guru types sometimes is the right person, the right moment, they can snap them, their presence can snap them into the right hemisphere, their brain and the right hemisphere way of looking at things. Which is, from it snaps them into right hemisphere way of seeing things that isn't just for a few moments. It actually stays. It's like a new structure of the way their mind works. And, the spiritual terms for that would be awakening or enlightenment or first, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Self-realization, whatever. It's just a different way of talking about the same thing. So you could put this all into brain terms. The problem is the people who want to put these things into brain terms tend to be very left hemisphere dominant and not into this kind of stuff. So again, you're at that kind of, you have to, that middle way between the two extremes, which is already a certain type of brain is like that.
Yeah.
This is something I've noticed. People are already like this, so they're not. A lot of people aren't, or most people just aren't, and it's really hard for them to have to keep two conflicting things on the go together in their mind and create a third thing out of them that's useful and true for them.
It's because they can't shut up about themselves. Silence is the key, I find. Just not thinking about things too much. Because, I was thinking about this the other day.
I don't know. I spent long periods in silence and then other long periods talking about myself constantly. These podcasts.
Yeah. Well, that's the purpose of what we're doing. But I guess, in terms of day-to-day living, really, all of this is just about living well, and you just need to be happy and engaged in the moment. So I'm just talking about like how this would look, for example, or how maybe it looks for me. So the meditative state that I described before about just kind of resting into awareness, I try to run that most of my day. So even if I'm in a corporate meeting or doing a spreadsheet, whatever it is, I still find that type of awareness is always available, even if I need to do something that you would consider to be left brain centric. And it's not necessarily easy, but it is nevertheless, I think, possible. And I've gotten better at it over the years as my practice with that has deepened. So that might give people some sort of notion about what it could be like. On the other hand, I rarely even think about myself. Sometimes, like when I think about what I used to be like and just how I would run narratives about myself constantly, these days, I think I'm a bit of an idiot. Like I think I'm a peasant or something like that, because I just kind of go and do things now. Whereas before I constantly would be thinking and, what about this theory? And, what about this book that I just read and all this different stuff? I'd much rather just go for a surf in the morning and just look at the sun. And it's been an interesting 180-degree turn in many ways, that, powering down the selfdom, doing all the physiological work has in many ways just allowed me or accentuated my enjoyment of life immensely compared to what it used to be like when I was a theory cell and a word cell. So it's really just allowed me to just live happily, like really happily. And people forget about that.
I also found I got better at reasoning. Like my reasoning skills improved, which I didn't try to do directly. It just because I cleared up a lot of this energy and time wasting stuff. Yeah, you can just think more clearly. So you can do the left hemisphere type stuff better because you have a better functioning relationship between the two halves.
It's more focused, right? Yeah. It's like now we're going to do this. This is
so it's not like you become stupid. See, a mistake I made, which I see a lot of people making now, especially with the fans of the McGilchrist book, is everyone goes so into practices that are more right-brained or embodiment style of things that you can end up kind of stupefying yourself. And for me, I stopped like reading for, not that there's anything wrong with not reading, but I used to read a lot, then I stopped reading for a while because I was just so desperate to get away from all that left brain word stuff that I actually lost a lot of time in things where I could have been training and understanding some useful things for me now. But I just felt the need to swing my own pendulum so far the other direction. Yeah. So I don't think that's necessary. I don't think you have to sit in your pants in the side of a mountain, being spaced out all the time, unless, for whatever reason. I don't think that's I don't think that's being a full human. Yeah. That will really annoy some people. I understand that they think some of those types of people are superhuman or whatever. Yeah. But I think there's two sides of the brain. There's two ways of knowing the world. It's clearly obvious that we're meant to be doing both. McGilchrist is a compelling case that there's a certain relationship between those two things that is better than the other, and I agree. And I'm happier since my life is more aligned with that way of living than it was the way before.